The music in Club Midnight was loud enough to make the walls shake. Red and blue lights flashed across the crowded dance floor where dozens of people moved to the heavy beat. In the corner, away from all the noise and chaos, sat Commander Sarah Mitchell. She wore simple jeans and a black t-shirt, trying her best to blend in with everyone else. Sarah had been looking forward to this night for months. After spending 18 months in classified operations across 3 different countries, she finally had some time off. No briefings, no mission reports, no life or death decisions. Just a quiet drink in a regular club where nobody knew who she was or what she did for a living. She took a slow sip of her beer and watched the crowd. College students, office workers, and military personnel from the nearby base all mixed together on the dance floor. It was nice to see people just having fun, living their normal lives without worrying about the things that kept Sarah awake at night. At 32 years old, Sarah had already achieved what most military officers only dreamed of. She commanded SEAL Team Alpha 7, the most elite and dangerous unit in the U.S. Navy. Her team handled missions that other special forces couldn't or wouldn't take on. Hostage rescues in enemy territory, deep reconnaissance behind enemy lines, and operations so classified that even other SEALs didn't know they existed. But tonight, she was just Sarah. Not Commander Mitchell. Not the woman who had led successful operations in places the government would never admit to visiting. Just a regular person trying to enjoy a beer and some peace and quiet. The peaceful moment didn't last long. Well, what do we have here? A loud voice cut through the music near her table. Sarah looked up to see 3 Marines in civilian clothes walking toward her. The one in front was tall and muscular, with short blonde hair and the kind of cocky smile that usually meant trouble. Sarah recognized the type immediately. Young, strong, and full of themselves after finishing basic training. They probably thought they were the toughest guys in the world and wanted everyone to know it. "You look lonely over here by yourself, sweetheart," the blonde Marine said, sliding into the seat across from her without being invited. His 2 friends flanked him on either side, blocking Sarah's view of the rest of the club. "I'm fine, thanks," Sarah replied calmly, taking another sip of her beer. She had dealt with guys like this before. Usually, a polite but firm rejection was enough to send them looking for easier targets. "Come on, don't be like that," the Marine continued. His name tag from earlier in the evening had said Peterson, though he wasn't wearing it now. "I'm Jake. These are my buddies Mike and Danny. We're Marines, just back from our first deployment. We know how to show a girl a good time." Sarah almost smiled at that. Their first deployment. They were probably barely 21 years old and thought they had seen everything the military had to offer. If only they knew who they were talking to. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm really just here to relax," Sarah said, her voice still polite but with a slight edge that most people would have recognized as a warning. Jake either didn't notice the warning or chose to ignore it. "Relax? This is a club, baby. You're supposed to be having fun. Dancing, drinking, maybe getting to know some real warriors." His friends laughed at this, clearly enjoying their leader's performance. Sarah noticed that several other people in the club had started to pay attention to what was happening at her table. Great! This was exactly the kind of attention she had been hoping to avoid. "Look, I'm sure you're all very impressive," Sarah said, setting down her beer and looking directly at Jake. "But I'm not interested. Please find somewhere else to sit." Instead of leaving, Jake leaned forward across the table. Sarah could smell the alcohol on his breath and see the arrogant gleam in his eyes. This was a young man who was used to getting his way, especially with women. "You know what your problem is?" Jake said, his voice getting louder. "You think you're too good for us. Just because we're enlisted guys and not fancy officers, you think you can just dismiss us." Sarah raised an eyebrow. How had he known she was an officer? She wasn't wearing anything that would identify her rank or even her branch of service. Then, she noticed him looking at her watch, a Rolex Submariner that had been a gift from her unit after a particularly successful mission. It was expensive enough to suggest she was either very well paid or had money from other sources. "I don't think I'm too good for anyone," Sarah said carefully. I just want to be left alone. See, that's where you're wrong, Jake said, his smile becoming more aggressive. Nobody comes to a club to be left alone. You came here looking for attention, and now you're playing hard to get because you think it makes you more interesting. Sarah felt her patience starting to wear thin. In her professional life, she commanded the respect of the most elite soldiers in the world. She had faced down terrorists, enemy soldiers, and hostile government officials without backing down. She wasn't about to be intimidated by some drunk Marine who thought his muscles made him invincible. This is your last chance to walk away, Sarah said quietly. Her voice had changed now, taking on the tone she used when giving orders to her team. Anyone with military experience would have recognized it immediately as the voice of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. Jake's friends shifted uncomfortably. Even through their alcohol-induced haze, they could tell that something had changed. The woman sitting across from them wasn't acting like the typical clubgoer they were used to dealing with. But Jake was either too drunk or too arrogant to notice the change. Instead, he laughed and turned to his friends. Can you believe this? Little Miss Officer thinks she can order me around. That was when Sarah realized that this situation wasn't going to end peacefully. She had seen enough men like Jake to know that he wouldn't back down until he had proven his point, whatever that point was supposed to be. His pride was on the line now, especially in front of his friends. Sarah quietly assessed her options. The table she was sitting at was in a corner, which limited her escape routes but also meant that fewer people would get caught in the middle if things went bad. The nearest exit was about 30 feet away, but she would have to go through Jake and his friends to reach it. She also noticed the club's security guards, two large men in black t-shirts who were standing near the bar. They had probably noticed the confrontation by now, but they seemed content to let it play out as long as nobody got physical. You know what I think? Jake continued, his voice getting even louder. I think you need someone to teach you some manners. Show you how to treat real men with respect. As he spoke, Jake reached across the table and tried to grab Sarah's hand. It was meant to be a dominating gesture, a way to show his friends and everyone else watching that he was in control of the situation. It was also a big mistake. Sarah's reflexes kicked in automatically. Years of combat training and real-world experience had taught her body to react to threats without conscious thought. As Jake's hand reached for hers, she grabbed his wrist and twisted it in a direction it wasn't meant to go. Jake yelped in pain and tried to pull his hand back, but Sarah's grip was like steel. She had spent years building the kind of functional strength that came from carrying heavy equipment through hostile territory and engaging in hand-to-hand combat with people who were trying to kill her. Let go of me! Jake shouted, his face turning red from pain and embarrassment. You grabbed me first, Sarah said calmly, maintaining her grip on his wrist. I'm just defending myself. Jake's friends finally snapped into action. Mike, the larger of the two, stood up quickly and moved around the table toward Sarah. Let him go, lady, or you're going to have a real problem. Sarah looked up at Mike without releasing Jake's wrist. Sit down, she said in the same quiet, commanding voice she had used earlier. This doesn't have to involve you. Mike hesitated for a moment. Something about the way Sarah spoke made him feel like he was being addressed by a superior officer, even though he knew that was impossible. She was just some woman in a club. But Jake was his friend, and Marine loyalty ran deep. Mike took another step forward, raising his hand as if to grab Sarah's shoulder. That was when everything went wrong. Sarah released Jake's wrist and stood up in one smooth motion. As Mike reached for her, she ducked under his arm and grabbed it, using his own momentum to send him crashing into the table behind her. Beer bottles and glasses went flying, creating a crash that could be heard even over the loud music. Jake, his wrist still aching from Sarah's grip, stumbled backward and knocked over his chair. Danny, the third Marine, stood frozen in place, not sure whether to help his friends or run for help. The entire club seemed to notice the commotion now. The music kept playing, but conversation stopped as people turned to see what was happening. The security guards started moving in their direction, pushing through the crowd. You crazy bitch! Jake screamed, holding his wrist. You broke my hand. Your hand is fine, Sarah said, though she hadn't moved from her defensive position. But, if you or your friends try to touch me again, I'll show you what a broken hand actually feels like. Mike was pulling himself up from the floor, his face red with anger and embarrassment. Beer dripped from his hair, and there was a small cut on his forehead where he had hit the edge of the table. You have no idea who you're messing with, Mike said, wiping blood from his face. We're United States Marines. We're trained killers. Sarah almost laughed at that. Trained killers. These boys had probably never seen real combat, never had to make the kind of life and death decisions that kept her awake at night. They thought their basic training made them dangerous, but they had no idea what real danger looked like. I'm sure you are, Sarah said, her voice still calm despite the chaos around her. But, this is a public place, and I'm not your enemy. Just walk away. By now, the security guards had reached their table. The larger of the two, a man who looked like he might have military experience himself, stepped between Sarah and the three Marines. All right, that's enough, the guard said firmly. What's going on here? This crazy woman attacked us for no reason, Jake said immediately, still holding his wrist dramatically. We were just trying to have a conversation, and she went psycho on us. The security guard looked at Sarah, who had relaxed her defensive stance but remained alert. Is that what happened, miss? They approached my table without invitation, Sarah said calmly. When I asked them to leave me alone, this one, she nodded toward Jake, tried to grab my hand. I defended myself. The guard looked around at the scene. The overturned table, the spilled drinks, Mike's bleeding forehead, and Jake's apparent injury all told a story. But, there were also several witnesses, and the guard had been watching the situation develop for several minutes before it became physical. I saw the whole thing, said a woman at a nearby table. Those guys were bothering her for 10 minutes. She kept asking them to leave her alone. Yeah, the blonde one grabbed her first, added a college-aged man who had been standing at the bar. She was just defending herself. Jake's face turned even redder as he realized that the witnesses weren't supporting his version of events. That's not how it happened, he protested. She's lying. Sir, you need to calm down, the security guard said firmly. From what I observed and what the witnesses are saying, you initiated physical contact with this lady after she repeatedly asked you to leave her alone. That's assault. Assault? Danny finally spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. We're Marines. We don't assault women. Being a Marine doesn't give you the right to put your hands on people who don't want to be touched, the guard replied. I think it's time for you gentlemen to leave. Jake looked like he was about to argue further, but Mike put a hand on his shoulder. Come on, man, Mike said quietly. Let's just go. This isn't worth it. But Jake's pride wouldn't let him back down. He had been humiliated in front of his friends, in front of witnesses, and by a woman who was probably half his size. In his alcohol-clouded mind, leaving now would be admitting defeat. No way, Jake said, shaking off Mike's hand. I'm not letting some stuck-up officer think she can embarrass Marines and get away with it. He took a step towards Sarah, his hands clenched into fists. The security guard moved to intercept him, but Jake was quicker than expected. He pushed past the guard and swung his fist directly at Sarah's face. It was the last mistake he would make that night. Sarah saw the punch coming from a mile away. Jake was drunk, angry, and telegraphing his intentions so clearly that she could have avoided the attack with her eyes closed. But, instead of simply dodging, she decided to end this confrontation once and for all. As Jake's fist came toward her face, Sarah stepped to the side and grabbed his arm. Using his own momentum against him, she spun him around and drove him face-first into the wall next to their table. The impact was loud enough to be heard over the music, and Jake dropped to the floor immediately. The entire club went silent. Even the DJ seemed to notice that something significant had happened, and the music faded to a lower volume. Jake lay on the floor, conscious but dazed. Blood trickled from his nose, and he groaned softly as he tried to figure out what had just happened to him. Sarah stood over him, not even breathing heavily. To everyone watching, it looked like she had barely exerted any effort at all. Jake, who had seemed so large and intimidating just moments before, now looked like a child who had picked a fight with his older sister. Mike and Danny stared in shock. They had never seen anyone move the way Sarah had just moved. It wasn't the clumsy brawling they were used to seeing in bar fights. It was precise, efficient, and professional. "Jesus," whispered someone in the crowd. "Where did she learn to do that?" The security guards were equally impressed. The larger guard approached Sarah carefully, his hands raised in a non-threatening manner. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back," he said respectfully. "Are you injured?" Sarah looked down at herself, checking for any damage. Her clothes were slightly wrinkled, and she had spilled some beer on her jeans when the table was knocked over, but she was completely unharmed. "I'm fine," she said, her voice returning to its earlier calm tone. "Is he okay?" The guard knelt down next to Jake, who was slowly sitting up and holding his bleeding nose. "He'll live," the guard said. "Probably has a concussion, though. We should call an ambulance." "No," Jake mumbled through his bloody nose. "No ambulance. I'm fine." But he clearly wasn't fine. When he tried to stand up, his legs wobbled, and Mike had to help him stay upright. The cocky, aggressive Marine from earlier had been replaced by a confused young man who couldn't quite understand how he had ended up on the floor. Sarah looked at the three Marines with something approaching pity. They had probably joined the military with dreams of becoming heroes, of serving their country and proving their toughness. Instead, they had spent their evening off harassing strangers in clubs and picking fights they couldn't win. "You should take your friend to a hospital," Sarah told Mike and Danny quietly. "He needs to have his head checked." Mike nodded, still staring at Sarah with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Who are you?" he asked. Sarah considered the question for a moment. She could have lied, could have made up some story about taking self-defense classes or having an older brother who taught her how to fight. But something about the whole situation made her want to tell the truth. "Someone you should have left alone," she said simply. The security guard was already calling for backup and medical assistance, despite Jake's protests. The crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation was starting to disperse, though many people continued to stare at Sarah with new interest. Sarah looked around at the chaos she had inadvertently created. Broken glass, overturned furniture, and blood on the floor. This was exactly the kind of attention she had been trying to avoid. "I should probably go," Sarah said to the security guard. "Actually, ma'am, I'm going to need you to stick around until the police get here," the guard replied. This was self-defense, clear as day, but we still need to file a report. Sarah nodded, understanding the procedure. She had been involved in enough incidents over the years to know how these things worked. The police would want statements from everyone involved, the witnesses would tell their versions of events, and eventually, she would be free to go. But there was one complication she hadn't considered. When the police ran her identification, they would discover that she wasn't just any random clubgoer. Her military record, while heavily classified, would still show up as something unusual. Questions would be asked. Phone calls would be made. Her quiet evening off was about to become much more complicated. As she waited for the police to arrive, Sarah couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. She had spent the last 18 months successfully completing some of the most dangerous missions in the world, facing down threats that would have terrified most people. But it was 3 drunk Marines in a civilian club who were going to blow her cover and bring unwanted attention to her unit. Jake was sitting in a chair now, still holding his nose and glaring at Sarah with undisguised hatred. Despite his injuries, she could see that his anger hadn't diminished. If anything, being embarrassed in front of so many people had made it worse. Sarah made a mental note to be extra careful over the next few days. Men like Jake didn't forget perceived slights easily, and Marines were taught to be resourceful when they wanted information about someone. She had a feeling that this night was just the beginning of her problems. The police station was buzzing with late-night activity when Sarah finished giving her statement. Detective Maria Rodriguez had been professional and thorough, taking down every detail of the incident at Club Midnight. After reviewing witness statements and security camera footage, it was clear that Sarah had acted in self-defense. "You're free to go, Ms. Mitchell," Detective Rodriguez said, handing Sarah a copy of the police report. "Though I have to say, that was some impressive defensive work back there. You have any martial arts training?" Sarah accepted the papers with a neutral expression. "A little," she said simply. The detective studied her for a moment longer, clearly curious about the woman who had taken down a Marine twice her size without breaking a sweat. But Sarah's military ID had shown only her rank and basic information, nothing that would explain her unusual skill set. "Well, whatever training you have, it served you well tonight," Detective Rodriguez said. "That young Marine is lucky you showed restraint. From what I saw on the security footage, you could have hurt him a lot worse." Sarah nodded politely and left the station. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and she was exhausted. All she wanted was to get home to her small apartment near the base and try to forget this whole evening had happened. But, as she walked to her car in the police station parking lot, Sarah noticed a familiar figure leaning against a pickup truck nearby. Jake Peterson was waiting for her, his nose now bandaged and his eyes burning with anger. "We need to talk," Jake said, pushing himself off the truck and walking toward her. Sarah stopped walking and assessed the situation. Jake was alone this time, and he appeared to be sober. The parking lot was well lit and within sight of the police station, so he probably wasn't planning anything violent. But his body language suggested he was still looking for a confrontation. "There's nothing to talk about," Sarah said calmly. "You grabbed me, I defended myself, end of story." "Go home, Marine." "Don't call me that," Jake snapped. "You don't have the right to call me Marine. Not after what you did in there." "What I did was perfectly legal," Sarah replied. The police agreed, the witnesses agreed, and the security footage proved it. "You're lucky I'm not pressing charges for assault." Jake's face twisted with anger. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Think you're better than everyone else because you can fight?" Sarah was getting tired of this conversation. She had dealt with ego-driven men before, both in and out of the military. The best strategy was usually to avoid engaging with their emotions and stick to facts. "I think I want to go home," she said. "And I think you should do the same." But Jake wasn't finished. "I did some checking on you while you were in there," he said, nodding toward the police station. "Called a buddy of mine who works in personnel at the base." "You know what he told me?" Sarah felt a small chill run down her spine. Her service record was classified, but basic information about her rank and assignment might be accessible to someone with the right connections. "He told me that Commander Sarah Mitchell doesn't exist in any normal unit," Jake continued, his voice getting excited. "No regular deployment records, no standard training documentation, nothing. Just a bunch of classified files and restricted access warnings." This was exactly what Sarah had been afraid of. Even though her specific missions were top secret, the very secrecy surrounding her record could be a clue to people who knew what to look for. "So I'm asking you again," Jake said, stepping closer. "Who are you really? What kind of officer has a completely classified service record?" Sarah considered her options. She could continue to deflect his questions, but Jake seemed determined to find answers. She could lie and make up some cover story, but he had already shown that he was willing to investigate her background. Or she could tell him just enough truth to satisfy his curiosity without revealing anything truly classified. "I work in naval intelligence," she said finally. "Most of what I do is classified, which is why you can't find normal records. It's nothing as exciting as you're imagining." It was technically true, though vastly incomplete. Sarah did work in naval intelligence, among many other things. Her unit's mission required them to gather and analyze intelligence as well as act on it. Jake studied her face, trying to determine if she was telling the truth. "Intelligence, huh? That explains the fighting skills?" "Intelligence officers receive combat training," Sarah said. "We sometimes work in dangerous areas." Again, technically true but missing about 90% of the story. Jake seemed to accept this explanation, though he still looked suspicious. Alright, so you're some kind of spy or something. That still doesn't give you the right to humiliate Marines in public. I didn't humiliate anyone, Sarah said firmly. You humiliated yourself by picking a fight you couldn't win. That's on you, not me. You could have just told us you were military, Jake protested. We would have backed off if we'd known you were an officer. Would you have? Sarah asked. Because from where I was sitting, you seemed pretty determined to prove how tough you were. And I shouldn't have to flash my credentials to be left alone in a public place. Jake didn't have a good answer for that. Deep down, he probably knew she was right. He had been showing off for his friends and had let his ego override his judgment. Look, Sarah said, softening her tone slightly. You're a Marine. That means something. But tonight you acted like just another drunk guy who thinks he can intimidate women. You're better than that. For a moment, Jake's angry expression wavered. Sarah could see the young man underneath the bravado, someone who had probably joined the Marines with genuine intentions to serve his country. I wasn't trying to intimidate anyone, he said quietly. You seemed lonely, and I thought. You thought you could pick up some random woman by cornering her and ignoring her when she asked to be left alone? Sarah finished. That's not how it works, Jake. Jake winced at hearing his own actions described so bluntly. It wasn't supposed to go like that. No, it wasn't, Sarah agreed. But it did, and now you need to learn from it. Next time, when a woman tells you she's not interested, believe her and walk away. There won't be a next time, Jake said. I'm not much of a club guy anyway. Sarah almost smiled at that. Probably for the best. You seem more like the type who should be focusing on his career and becoming the kind of Marine you wanted to be when you enlisted. Jake looked surprised that she was offering advice instead of continuing to lecture him. You really think I can be that kind of Marine? That's up to you, Sarah said. But you're not going to get there by picking fights in bars and harassing women. You're going to get there by training hard, following orders, and taking care of your fellow Marines. Jake nodded slowly, and, for the first time since their confrontation began, he looked genuinely thoughtful rather than angry. I owe you an apology, he said finally. What I did tonight was wrong. I grabbed you without permission, and I put my friends in a bad situation because of my ego. Sarah was impressed. It took character to admit mistakes, especially for someone as proud as Jake clearly was. Apology accepted, she said. Just don't do it again. I won't, Jake promised. And, thanks for not seriously hurting me back there. I could tell you were holding back. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? The way you moved, Jake said. It wasn't like any bar fight I've ever seen. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you stopped the second I wasn't a threat anymore. Most people would have kept hitting until security pulled them off. He was more observant than Sarah had given him credit for. Violence should be a last resort, and, when you do use it, you should use only as much as necessary to end the threat. Is that something they teach in intelligence school? Jake asked. Among other places, Sarah replied vaguely. Jake seemed to sense that he had reached the limit of what she was willing to discuss about her background. Well, anyway, I should probably get going. My friends are probably worried about me. How's Mike's head? Sarah asked. He hit that table pretty hard. He'll be fine. Embarrassed, but fine. He's the one who convinced me to come here and talk to you instead of just staying angry about it. Smart friend, Sarah said. Listen to him more often. Jake nodded and started walking back toward his truck. Then, he stopped and turned around. Can I ask you one more thing? He said. Sure. If I wanted to transfer to intelligence work, how would I go about it? Sarah was surprised by the question. Why would you want to do that? Honestly? Tonight made me realize I don't know as much about the military as I thought I did. I joined the Marines thinking I understood what it meant to be a warrior, but you showed me there's a lot more to it than just being tough. Sarah considered her answer carefully. Intelligence work isn't for everyone. It requires discipline, patience, and the ability to think strategically rather than just react. But, if you're serious about it, talk to your commanding officer about cross-training opportunities. I will, Jake said. Thanks. As Jake drove away, Sarah finally got into her own car and started the drive home. It had been a strange night, but she found herself oddly hopeful about Jake's future. He had shown the ability to recognize his mistakes and learn from them, which was more than many people could manage. But her peaceful reflection was interrupted by the buzz of her secure phone. The device was encrypted and could only be reached by a handful of people, all of whom had clearance to know about her real job. Mitchell, she answered. Sarah, it's Admiral Harrison, came the familiar voice of her commanding officer. I just got a very interesting phone call from the shore patrol about an incident involving one of my officers. Sarah's heart sank. She had hoped that the incident at the club would stay local, but, apparently, word had already reached her superiors. Sir, I can explain, I'm sure you can, Admiral Harrison interrupted. But, not over the phone. Report to my office at 0800 hours tomorrow. We need to discuss your operational security procedures. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in the dim light of the parking lot. Admiral Harrison was not someone who called in the middle of the night over minor issues. If he wanted to see her in his office, it meant that her cover might be more compromised than she had realized. Sarah spent the drive home thinking about the potential consequences of the evening's events. Her unit's effectiveness depended on their ability to operate without attracting attention. If her identity had been compromised, it could affect not just her own career but the safety of her entire team. When she finally reached her apartment, Sarah was surprised to find lights on in her living room. She approached the door carefully, her hand moving instinctively to where she would normally carry her sidearm. But she was off duty and in civilian clothes, so she was unarmed. She unlocked the door slowly and peered inside. Sitting in her favorite chair was Lieutenant Commander David Chen, her second in command and the person she trusted most in the world. Rough night? Chen asked with a slight smile. How did you get in here? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Chen had the same specialized training she did, which included bypassing most standard security systems. Same way you would, Chen replied. The Admiral asked me to check on you after he got the call from Shore Patrol. Sarah closed the door behind her and activated the security system. Let me guess, you've already read the police report and reviewed the security footage. Of course, Chen said. Impressive work, by the way. Though maybe a little too impressive for someone who's supposed to be maintaining a low profile. Sarah collapsed onto her couch, suddenly, feeling every minute of the long day. The guy grabbed me, David. What was I supposed to do? Handle it exactly the way you did, Chen said seriously. You showed remarkable restraint. But the problem isn't what you did, it's what happened afterward. Jake Peterson, Sarah said, understanding immediately. Exactly. A Marine who starts asking questions about classified service records is the kind of attention we can't afford. Especially right now. Sarah looked at Chen sharply. What do you mean, especially right now? Chen's expression became more serious. The Admiral will brief you tomorrow, but I can tell you that we've got a new mission coming up. Something big. And, if your cover has been blown, it could affect the entire operation. Sarah felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had spent years building her cover identity, carefully establishing herself as just another naval officer with an unremarkable career. If that cover was compromised, it would take months or even years to rebuild. How bad is it? She asked. We're not sure yet, Chen admitted. Peterson hasn't shared his suspicions with anyone outside his immediate circle, as far as we can tell. But he's not going to just forget about this. He's going to keep digging. I talked to him in the parking lot, Sarah said. Try to convince him that I work in standard naval intelligence. He seemed to buy it. Maybe, Chen said. But people like Peterson have a way of finding things out, especially when they're motivated. And, from what I understand, you gave him quite a motivation. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. So what are our options? That's what tomorrow's meeting is about, Chen said. But, I can tell you that relocation is on the table. Relocation? Sarah sat up straighter. David, I've been building contacts and covers in this area for 3 years. If we relocate now, I know, Chen said. But, operational security comes first. You know that. Sarah did know that, but it didn't make the prospect any less frustrating. She loved her job, but the constant need for secrecy and the sacrifices it required were becoming more difficult to bear. There might be another option, Chen said carefully. What kind of option? We could bring Peterson in. Sarah stared at him. Bring him in? David, he's a barely trained Marine with anger management issues. What possible use could we have for someone like that? Actually, his record is better than you might think, Chen said. I pulled his file after the Admiral called. High test scores, excellent marksmanship, and leadership potential according to his instructors. The incident tonight was out of character for him. And? Sarah prompted. And, we're always looking for good people, especially people with military backgrounds who can blend in with other service members. Peterson's questions about you suggest he has good investigative instincts. Sarah considered this possibility. It was true that their unit was always recruiting, and finding people with the right combination of skills, clearance potential, and psychological makeup was increasingly difficult. Even if he has potential, Sarah said, bringing him in just because he stumbled onto classified information sets a bad precedent. Maybe, Chen agreed. But, the alternative might be worse. If we relocate you, we lose 3 years of operational preparation. If we leave you in place and Peterson keeps digging, we risk exposing the entire team. It was a classic catch-22 situation, the kind that Sarah's job presented on a regular basis. No matter what choice they made, there would be risks and consequences. What's your gut feeling? Sarah asked. Chen had excellent instincts about people, and his opinion carried a lot of weight with the Admiral. My gut says Peterson is someone who could be trusted with classified information, if he's handled correctly, Chen said. But, my gut also says that bringing him in would be a huge gamble. And, if the gamble doesn't pay off? Then, we have bigger problems than blown cover identities, Chen said grimly. Sarah leaned back on her couch and closed her eyes. When she had woken up that morning, her biggest concern had been deciding whether to do laundry or catch up on her reading. Now she was potentially facing relocation, mission compromise, or the recruitment of a volatile Marine who had assaulted her just hours earlier. The Admiral wants your recommendation tomorrow, Chen said. Whatever you decide, the team will support you. Thanks, Sarah said. That means a lot. Chen stood up to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call tonight. Both at the club and in the parking lot afterward. Peterson needed to learn that his actions have consequences, and you taught him that lesson without destroying him in the process. I hope so, Sarah said. Because if this goes wrong, a lot of people are going to pay the price. After Chen left, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, thinking about the strange turns her life had taken. She had joined the military to serve her country and make a difference in the world. Along the way, she had discovered that she had a talent for the kind of dangerous work that most people couldn't even imagine. But, tonight had reminded her that even the most carefully planned cover could be blown by a random encounter in a civilian club. No matter how well trained she was, she couldn't control every variable in her environment. As she finally headed to bed, Sarah made a mental note to recommend increased security awareness training for her team. If a drunk Marine could stumble onto classified information this easily, there were probably other vulnerabilities they hadn't considered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions. But, tonight, she was just grateful that everyone had survived the encounter without serious injury. She fell asleep wondering what Jake Peterson was doing right now, and whether he had any idea how dramatically his life might be about to change. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Admiral Harrison's office exactly at 0800 hours. The Admiral's assistant, a sharp-eyed Navy yeoman, gestured for her to go straight in. Admiral Harrison was sitting behind his desk, reading what appeared to be her incident report from the previous night. "Close the door, Commander," he said without looking up. Sarah did as instructed and took a seat across from the Admiral's desk. She had worked under Harrison for 2 years and had enormous respect for him, but she had never seen him look quite this serious. "Interesting evening you had," Harrison said, finally, setting down the report and looking directly at her. "Tell me, in your professional opinion, how badly has our operational security been compromised?" Sarah had been expecting this question and had spent most of the night thinking about her answer. "Sir, Marine Peterson has suspicions about my background, but no concrete information about our unit or its mission. He believes I work in standard naval intelligence, which is a reasonable cover story that explains both my rank and my security clearances." "And you believe he'll be satisfied with that explanation?" "For now, yes. But Peterson has shown that he's willing to investigate when his curiosity is aroused. If he continues digging, he may uncover information that contradicts the cover story." Admiral Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Lieutenant Commander Chen briefed me on his conversation with you last night. He mentioned that recruitment might be an option." "It's one option, sir," Sarah said carefully. "Though not without significant risks." "Walk me through those risks." Sarah had prepared for this question as well. "Peterson has demonstrated poor judgment and impulse control. He drinks to excess, he has a history of aggressive behavior, and he's shown a willingness to use physical force to get his way. Those are not qualities we typically look for in our personnel." "And the potential benefits?" "He has good investigative instincts, military training, and the psychological profile suggests he could be loyal to the right cause. His service record indicates leadership potential and high intelligence scores." Admiral Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "I had a very interesting conversation last night with Colonel Martinez, Peterson's commanding officer. It seems our young Marine has been requesting transfer to military intelligence for the past 6 months. This was news to Sarah. 6 months? That was long before our encounter. Exactly. Peterson wasn't randomly investigating you out of spite or curiosity. He's been actively researching intelligence careers and trying to understand what those positions actually entail. Your classified record triggered his attention because it matches the pattern he's been studying." Sarah felt a shift in her understanding of the situation. If Peterson had been genuinely interested in intelligence work before their encounter, that changed the calculus significantly. "What else did Colonel Martinez tell you about him?" she asked. "Peterson enlisted right out of high school with the goal of eventually becoming an officer. He's been taking college courses during his off-duty hours and has maintained a 3.8 GPA while serving on active duty. His peers respect him, his superiors consider him promising, and, until last night, he had a spotless disciplinary record." "Then, why was he acting like an entitled drunk at the club?" Admiral Harrison almost smiled. According to his friends, Peterson had just received news that his application for officer candidate school had been rejected due to insufficient leadership experience. He was drinking to cope with disappointment, not because he has an alcohol problem. Sarah was beginning to see Peterson in a very different light. Instead of a random troublemaker, he was starting to look like someone who had simply made a bad decision at a vulnerable moment. "Sir, are you suggesting that we actively recruit him?" "I'm suggesting that we explore the possibility," Harrison said. "Our current mission requirements call for personnel who can blend in with regular military units while conducting intelligence gathering. Peterson's background and legitimate interest in the field make him a potentially valuable asset. And if he refuses? Or if he can't handle the psychological evaluation? Then, we implement standard containment protocols," Harrison said matter-of-factly. "But I have a feeling Peterson might surprise us." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. What would the recruitment process look like? Standard procedure, with some modifications for the unusual circumstances. You would approach him as a representative of naval intelligence and gauge his interest. If he's receptive, we bring him in for preliminary evaluation and psychological screening. Me approach him? Sir, given our history, I'm not sure that's the best idea. On the contrary, you're exactly the right person, Harrison said. Peterson has already seen you in action, which gives you credibility he wouldn't automatically grant to someone else. And your conversation with him last night suggests that he respects your abilities despite the circumstances of your meeting. Sarah could see the logic in that, though she still had reservations. What about his friends? Mike and Danny were there for everything that happened. Minor concern. They don't have Peterson's investigative drive or his interest in intelligence work. As long as Peterson doesn't share classified information with them, they'll eventually forget about the incident. And if Peterson does share information? Then, we'll deal with that problem when it arises, Harrison said. But part of the evaluation process will be determining his ability to maintain operational security. Sarah nodded, understanding that this decision had essentially been made before she walked into the office. When do you want me to approach him? Today. Peterson is scheduled for physical training at 1,400 hours at the base gym. You'll have an opportunity to speak with him privately afterward. Sir, don't you think it would be suspicious if I just happened to run into him at the gym? Admiral Harrison reached into his desk and pulled out a folder. Not if you're there for a legitimate reason. As of this morning, you've been assigned to evaluate physical training protocols for intelligence personnel. That assignment requires you to observe and participate in standard military fitness routines. Sarah accepted the folder, impressed despite herself at how quickly her superiors had arranged the cover story. And if Peterson isn't interested? Then, we move to Plan B, Harrison said. Chen is already preparing relocation protocols for you and the team. I'd rather not relocate if we can avoid it, Sarah said honestly. I know. That's why I'm hoping Peterson proves to be as promising as his record suggests. Sarah stood to leave, then paused. Sir, can I ask you something off the record? Of course. Do you really think Peterson has the potential to work in our unit, or are we just trying to solve a security problem? Admiral Harrison was quiet for a long moment before answering. Honestly? I think Peterson has the potential to be exceptional. His test scores and leadership evaluations suggest someone with the intelligence and drive to excel in specialized operations. But potential isn't performance, and we won't know for certain until we put him through the evaluation process. And if he washes out? Then, we'll have learned something valuable about our recruitment procedures, Harrison said. Either way, this situation has highlighted some vulnerabilities in our operational security that we need to address. Sarah left the Admiral's office with mixed feelings. Part of her was excited about the possibility of bringing new talent onto the team, but another part was worried about the risks involved. She had worked hard to build Team Alpha 7 into an effective unit, and she didn't want to jeopardize that by making a hasty recruitment decision. She spent the rest of the morning reviewing Peterson's service record and psychological evaluations. The picture that emerged was of a young man with significant potential who had perhaps chosen the wrong outlet for his ambitions. The Marine Corps was excellent at producing infantry soldiers, but it wasn't necessarily the best place for someone with Peterson's intellectual capabilities. At 1,330 hours, Sarah changed into workout gear and headed to the base gym. She had decided to arrive early to observe Peterson's training routine and get a sense of how he interacted with his peers in a military environment. The gym was busy with the usual mix of service members maintaining their physical fitness requirements. Sarah spotted Peterson immediately, working out with a group of Marines who appeared to be his regular training partners. He was leading them through a series of exercises, calling out encouragement and making sure everyone maintained proper form. Sarah was impressed. This was a very different Jake Peterson than the one she had encountered at the club. Here, he was clearly a natural leader who genuinely cared about his fellow Marines. His technique was excellent, his attitude was positive, and his peers obviously respected his guidance. After watching for about 20 minutes, Sarah approached the group during a water break. Peterson noticed her immediately, and she saw a mix of surprise and wariness cross his face. "Commander Mitchell," he said, standing straighter automatically. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Marine Peterson," Sarah replied formally. "I'm conducting an evaluation of base fitness protocols for a new Navy program." "Mind if I observe your training routine?" Peterson glanced at his friends, who were watching the interaction with curiosity. "Of course, ma'am. We were just finishing up our circuit training and moving to combat conditioning." "Excellent. Carry on." For the next hour, Sarah watched Peterson lead his team through an impressive workout routine that combined strength training, cardiovascular conditioning, and martial arts practice. She was particularly interested in his approach to combat training, which showed a level of sophistication that went beyond basic Marine instruction. "Where did you learn those techniques?" she asked during another break. "I've been studying mixed martial arts on my own time," Peterson explained. "I figure the more I know about different fighting styles, the better prepared I'll be for whatever missions come my way." Sarah nodded approvingly. The fact that Peterson was seeking additional training on his own initiative was exactly the kind of behavior they looked for in potential recruits. After the workout was finished, Peterson's friends headed to the showers while he stayed behind to clean up the equipment. Sarah approached him when they were alone. "That was impressive training," she said. "Your team clearly respects your leadership." "Thank you, ma'am," Peterson replied, though he still looked uncertain about her presence. "About last night is in the past," Sarah interrupted. "I'm here today because I'm interested in discussing your future." Peterson stopped organizing the equipment and looked at her directly. "What kind of future?" Sarah glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "You mentioned last night that you're interested in intelligence work. I might be able to help with that." "I don't understand," Peterson said slowly. "I thought you said you worked in regular naval intelligence." "I said I worked in naval intelligence," Sarah corrected. "I didn't say it was regular." Peterson's eyes widened slightly as he began to understand the implication. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you the opportunity to find out if you're qualified for the kind of work I do," Sarah said carefully. "But, before we go any further, I need to know if you can keep a conversation like this completely confidential." "Of course," Peterson said immediately. "But, can I ask what kind of work we're talking about?" Sarah considered how much to reveal. "The kind of work that requires people who can think on their feet, handle dangerous situations, and maintain absolute secrecy about their activities. The kind of work that uses all the skills you've been developing, plus skills you haven't learned yet." Peterson was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "And, you think I might be qualified for this kind of work?" "I think you have potential," Sarah said honestly. "But, potential isn't enough. There would be extensive evaluation, background investigation, and psychological screening. Most people don't make it through the process." "But, if I did make it through?" "Then, you'd be working on missions that most people can't imagine," Sarah said. "You'd be protecting your country in ways that would never make it into the history books. And, you'd be working with people who are among the best at what they do in the entire world." Peterson's expression had become very serious. "This is what you really do, isn't it? Not just regular intelligence work." "I can't discuss specifics," Sarah said. "But, yes, this is what I really do. And, last night, when I grabbed you, you made physical contact with someone who has been trained to neutralize much more serious threats than a drunk Marine in a bar," Sarah said bluntly. "You're lucky I recognized that you weren't a real danger." Peterson winced at that. "I could have really gotten hurt, couldn't I?" "You could have gotten dead if I had misread the situation," Sarah said. "That's why the people who do this kind of work have to be completely trustworthy. There's no room for the kind of judgment errors you made last night." "I understand," Peterson said quietly. "And, I know I screwed up. But, I also know that I want to be better than that. I want to do work that matters." Sarah studied his face, looking for any signs of insincerity or hidden agenda. What she saw was a young man who was genuinely committed to improving himself and serving his country. "If you're serious about this," she said, "then you need to understand that everything changes. Your social life, your relationships, even your identity might have to be modified to maintain operational security. This isn't a career choice, it's a complete life change." "I understand," Peterson said. "At least, I think I do. I know I have a lot to learn." "Everyone has a lot to learn when they start," Sarah said. "The question is whether you have the discipline and dedication to learn it." "I do," Peterson said without hesitation. "I know I messed up last night, but that's not who I really am. I've been working towards something like this my whole adult life, I just didn't know it existed." Sarah made her decision. "All right. If you're interested, report to Building 127 tomorrow morning at 0800 hours. Ask for Lieutenant Commander Chen. Tell him that Commander Mitchell sent you for preliminary evaluation." Peterson nodded seriously. "Building 127, 0800 hours, ask for Lieutenant Commander Chen. And, Peterson," Sarah added, "from this moment forward, you don't discuss this conversation with anyone. Not your friends, not your family, not even other military personnel. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am." Sarah turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. If you do this, there's a good chance you'll eventually work directly with me. Can you handle taking orders from someone who kicked your ass in a bar?" Peterson almost smiled at that. "Ma'am, after seeing what you can do, I'd consider it an honor to learn from you." As Sarah left the gym, she reflected on how much her opinion of Jake Peterson had changed in the past 24 hours. The young man she had just spoken with was nothing like the drunk Marine who had grabbed her at Club Midnight. This Peterson was focused, respectful, and genuinely committed to excellence. She hoped that version of himself was the real Jake Peterson, because if he made it through the evaluation process, his life was about to become very complicated very quickly. But, as she walked back to her office, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that recruiting Peterson was either going to be the best decision she had made in months, or the biggest mistake of her career. Only time would tell which one it turned out to be. Jake Peterson stood outside Building 127 at exactly 0755 hours, checking his appearance one last time. He had spent most of the previous evening researching what little public information he could find about specialized military units, trying to prepare himself for whatever evaluation awaited him inside. The building itself was unremarkable, a standard military office structure that could have housed any number of administrative functions. But Jake noticed several subtle security features that suggested this wasn't just another paperwork facility. The windows were reinforced, the access points were controlled by card readers rather than simple locks, and there were cameras positioned to monitor every approach. At exactly 0800 hours, Jake entered the building and approached the reception desk. A petty officer in dress uniform looked up from her computer screen. "Marine Peterson," Jake said. "I'm here to see Lieutenant Commander Chen. Commander Mitchell sent me." The petty officer checked her computer and nodded. "The lieutenant commander is expecting you. 3rd floor, room 314. Take the elevator on your right." Jake followed the directions and found himself standing outside a door marked only with the room number. He knocked twice and heard a voice call for him to enter. Lieutenant Commander Chen was younger than Jake had expected, probably in his early 30s, with an athletic build and the kind of calm presence that suggested extensive combat experience. He was sitting behind a desk reading what appeared to be Jake's service record. "Marine Peterson," Chen said, looking up. "Please, have a seat. I'm Lieutenant Commander Chen, and I'll be conducting your preliminary evaluation." Jake sat down in the chair across from Chen's desk, trying to project confidence while fighting off his nervousness. "Thank you for seeing me, sir." "Before we begin," Chen said, "I need to make sure you understand the gravity of this situation. What we discuss in this room is classified at the highest levels. If you decide not to proceed with the evaluation process, or if we decide you're not suitable for our purposes, you will be required to sign documentation stating that you will never discuss what happens here." "I understand, sir." "Good. Chen set down Jake's file and leaned back in his chair. Tell me why you want to work in intelligence. Jake had been preparing for this question since leaving the gym yesterday. Sir, I joined the Marines because I wanted to serve my country and make a difference. The regular infantry has been a good learning experience, but I feel like I could contribute more in a role that requires strategic thinking and specialized skills. And what makes you think you have the capabilities for that kind of work? Honestly, sir, I'm not sure I do, Jake said. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to find out. I've been studying intelligence methods on my own time, I've maintained high academic performance while serving on active duty, and I'm committed to developing whatever skills are required. Chen nodded approvingly. That's a good answer. Too many people think they already know what this work entails. Tell me about the incident at Club Midnight. Jake had been dreading this question, but he had promised himself he would be completely honest. I made a series of poor decisions that resulted in me assaulting a superior officer. I was drinking to cope with disappointment about my OCS application being rejected, and I let my ego override my training and my values. And what did you learn from that experience? I learned that my emotional control isn't as good as I thought it was, Jake said. I also learned that there are people in the military whose capabilities far exceed anything I had previously encountered. Commander Mitchell could have seriously injured me, but she showed restraint and professionalism even while defending herself. How do you feel about the possibility of working under Commander Mitchell's command? Jake thought about this carefully. Sir, I would consider it a privilege. She demonstrated skills I want to develop, judgment I want to learn, and professionalism I want to emulate. If she's willing to give me a chance despite how we met, then I'm committed to proving that her faith isn't misplaced. Chen made some notes on a pad of paper. Tell me about your long-term career goals. Before yesterday, my goal was to become a Marine officer and eventually work in military intelligence, Jake said. Now I'm beginning to understand that there might be opportunities one hadn't previously considered. My goal is to develop my capabilities to their fullest extent and contribute to missions that protect American interests. Are you prepared for the possibility that your work might never be publicly recognized? Yes, sir. The satisfaction of doing important work well is more important to me than public recognition. What about the possibility that your work might require you to operate under false identities or in morally ambiguous situations? Jake paused at this question. It was the first hint he had received about what this work might actually involve. Sir, I trust that any missions I would be assigned would serve legitimate American interests, even if the methods aren't conventional. As long as I'm serving my country and protecting innocent people, I can handle moral ambiguity. Chen continued the questioning for another hour, covering everything from Jake's family background to his financial situation to his personal relationships. Jake answered every question as honestly as possible, even when he suspected the answers might not be what Chen wanted to hear. Finally, Chen set down his notes and looked directly at Jake. Marine Peterson, based on this initial evaluation, I'm recommending you for the next phase of the screening process. This will involve extensive background investigation, psychological evaluation, and skills testing. The entire process takes approximately 6 weeks, and most candidates don't make it through. Jake felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. What happens if I do make it through? Then, you'll be assigned to a specialized unit that handles classified operations for naval intelligence, Chen said. Your Marine Corps status will be maintained for administrative purposes, but your actual duties will be completely different from anything you've done before. And if I don't make it through? Then, you return to your regular duties with your current unit, and you never discuss any of this with anyone for the rest of your life. Jake nodded seriously. I understand, sir. What's the next step? Chen handed him a thick envelope. Report to the address inside this envelope tomorrow morning at 0600 hours. Bring civilian clothes for a 3-day evaluation period. Tell your current commanding officer that you're participating in a cross-training exercise with naval intelligence. Sir, what should I tell my friends about where I'm going? As little as possible, Chen said firmly. The cover story about cross-training should be sufficient for anyone who asks. Remember, operational security begins now. Jake stood to leave, then hesitated. Sir, can I ask what Commander Mitchell said about me? Chen almost smiled. She said you had potential but needed guidance. She also said that if you could channel your aggressive tendencies in the right direction, you might become a valuable asset. She said I was aggressive? She said you had controlled aggression that could be useful in the right circumstances, Chen clarified. That's actually a compliment, Peterson. We don't recruit people who are afraid to fight when fighting is necessary. Jake left Building 127 with his mind racing. Everything about his conversation with Chen had reinforced his belief that this was the opportunity he had been looking for his entire adult life. But he was also beginning to understand that he had no idea what he was getting himself into. That evening, Jake carefully read through the materials Chen had given him. Most of it was standard paperwork, background investigation forms, medical history questionnaires, and security clearance applications. But there were also some documents that hinted at the extraordinary nature of what he was potentially signing up for. One form asked about his willingness to undergo enhanced physical conditioning beyond standard military requirements. Another asked about his comfort level with extended deployment to areas not officially recognized by the U.S. government. A third asked whether he had any philosophical objections to information gathering activities that might involve deception. As Jake filled out the forms, he began to realize that he was potentially joining something that operated far outside the normal boundaries of military service. The questions suggested activities that went well beyond the intelligence work he had imagined. But, rather than discouraging him, this realization only increased his excitement. This was exactly the kind of challenging, meaningful work he had been seeking. If he could make it through the evaluation process, he would have the chance to serve his country in ways that most people couldn't even imagine. The next morning, Jake reported to the address Chen had provided. It turned out to be a nondescript office building about 30 minutes from the base, the kind of place that could house insurance companies or accounting firms. But, when he approached the reception desk, the security guard clearly knew who he was and what he was there for. Peterson, the guard asked. Yes, sir. 8th floor, room 847. They're waiting for you. The 8th floor was very different from the bland corporate appearance of the building's lobby. Jake found himself in what was obviously a sophisticated training facility, complete with classrooms, computer labs, and what appeared to be a small gymnasium. Room 847 turned out to be a conference room where 3 people were waiting for him. He recognized Lieutenant Commander Chen immediately, but the other 2 were strangers, a woman in Navy uniform with commander's stripes, and a civilian man in an expensive-looking suit. Peterson, Chen said as Jake entered the room. I'd like you to meet Commander Rodriguez, who oversees personnel evaluation for our unit, and Mr. Thompson, who handles psychological screening. Jake shook hands with both of them, trying to project confidence despite his nervousness. Please, have a seat, Commander Rodriguez said. We're going to begin with some basic aptitude testing, followed by psychological evaluation, and then physical assessment. The entire process will take 3 days, and you'll be staying in quarters here in the building. Yes, ma'am. Before we begin, Mr. Thompson said, I want to make sure you understand that this evaluation is designed to push you to your limits. We're going to test your intellectual capabilities, your emotional stability, your physical endurance, and your ability to handle stress. Most people find the process extremely challenging. I understand, sir. Good. We'll also be conducting interviews with people from your background, family members, friends, former teachers, military colleagues. They won't be told why we're investigating you, but they will be asked detailed questions about your character and capabilities. Jake felt a moment of anxiety at this news. He had always tried to maintain good relationships with people, but he wasn't sure how his family and friends would respond to unexpected visits from federal investigators. Is there anyone in your background who might say negative things about you? Commander Rodriguez asked, apparently noticing his expression. I don't think so, ma'am, Jake said. But there might be people who question why I'm being investigated for something like this. I wasn't exactly the most obvious candidate for intelligence work when I was younger. What do you mean by that? Mr. Thompson asked. Jake thought about how to explain his background honestly without making himself sound unsuitable. I was more focused on athletics and social activities than academics in high school. I didn't really develop serious career ambitions until I joined the Marines. Some people might be surprised that I'm being considered for intellectual work. And how do you feel about that? Thompson continued. I feel like I'm not the same person I was in high school, Jake said. Military service has helped me focus on what's really important and develop capabilities I didn't know I had. Commander Rodriguez made some notes. We'll be the judges of that. Are you ready to begin? Yes, ma'am. The next 3 days were unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. The intellectual testing was more challenging than any academic work he had encountered, covering everything from advanced mathematics to foreign language aptitude to strategic analysis. The psychological evaluation involved hours of interviews, personality tests, and scenario-based assessments that seemed designed to reveal every aspect of his character. But it was the physical testing that really surprised him. Jake had thought he was in excellent shape from his Marine training, but the evaluation pushed him far beyond anything he had previously attempted. The exercises seemed designed to test not just his strength and endurance, but his ability to think clearly and make good decisions while under extreme physical stress. On the final day, Jake found himself in a scenario-based exercise that felt remarkably realistic. He was given a cover identity and a mission objective, then placed in a simulated environment where he had to gather information while avoiding detection. The exercise required him to use skills he had never been taught, relying instead on instinct, creativity, and quick thinking. When the 3 days were finally over, Jake was exhausted but exhilarated. He had no idea whether he had passed or failed the evaluation, but he knew that he had given his absolute best effort. Thank you, Peterson, Commander Rodriguez said as the evaluation concluded. You'll return to your regular duties while we analyze your results. We'll contact you within 2 weeks with our decision. Ma'am, can I ask how I did? You'll know when we know, she said with a slight smile. But I will say this, you exceeded some expectations and fell short of others. Whether that adds up to success or failure remains to be determined. As Jake left the building and headed back to base, he realized that regardless of the outcome, the past 3 days had changed his understanding of what was possible in military service. He had seen capabilities and technologies that he hadn't known existed, and he had been challenged in ways that pushed him to discover new aspects of his own potential. Even if he didn't make it into this specialized unit, the evaluation process had shown him that there were levels of excellence he hadn't previously imagined. That knowledge alone was worth the risk he had taken in pursuing this opportunity. But, as he returned to his regular duties, Jake couldn't help hoping that in 2 weeks, his life would be completely different than it was today. 2 weeks passed with agonizing slowness. Jake threw himself into his regular Marine duties, trying to stay focused on his current responsibilities while fighting the urge to constantly check his phone for messages from Building 127. His friends noticed that he seemed different, more focused, more serious about his training, but when they asked about his 3-day absence, he simply said it had been cross-training with naval intelligence. On a Thursday afternoon, while Jake was leading his squad through weapons maintenance, his commanding officer approached with an unusual expression. Peterson, Colonel Martinez said, report to my office immediately. Jake's heart rate increased as he followed the colonel into his private office. Martinez closed the door and gestured for Jake to sit down. I just received an interesting phone call, Martinez said, settling behind his desk. It seems that Naval Intelligence wants to borrow one of my Marines for an extended assignment. Jake tried to keep his expression neutral, but inside he was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Sir? They've requested that you be transferred to a special projects unit, effective immediately. The assignment is classified, but it's been approved at the highest levels. Martinez studied Jake's face carefully. You don't seem surprised by this news. No, sir. I've been hoping for an opportunity like this. I see. And you didn't think to mention to your commanding officer that you were being evaluated for a transfer? Jake felt a moment of panic. Had he violated protocol by not informing Martinez about the evaluation process? Sir, I was instructed not to discuss the evaluation with anyone.
Martinez nodded slowly.
That's what I figured. These intelligence people are very particular about operational security. He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope.
Your new orders.
You report to Commander Mitchell on Monday morning.
Jake accepted the envelope with hands that were trying very hard not to shake. Commander Mitchell will be my new commanding officer?
According to these orders, yes. Though I suspect the actual command structure is more complicated than the paperwork suggests.
Martinez leaned back in his chair. Peterson, I'm going to be honest with you. I've never seen orders like these before.
Usually when we transfer personnel to other units, there's extensive documentation about the receiving unit's mission and structure. These orders tell me almost nothing except that you've been assigned to special projects under the direct authority of Naval Intelligence.
Sir, what does that mean for my Marine Corps service?
It means you're still technically a Marine, but you'll be working under Navy command for an indefinite period. Your Marine rank will be maintained, but your actual duties will be determined by your new unit.
Martinez paused. Jake, I want you to understand that this kind of assignment usually means one of two things. Either you've impressed some very important people, or you've gotten yourself into something that's way over your head.
Sir, I believe it's the first one.
I hope so. Because if it's the second one, there won't be much I can do to help you. Martinez stood up and extended his hand. Good luck, Marine.
I hope this opportunity lives up to your expectations. Jake shook his colonel's hand, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension.
Thank you, sir. For everything.
That weekend, Jake spent his time preparing for what he knew would be a major transition in his life. He moved his personal belongings out of the barracks and into a small off-base apartment, as his orders had specified that he would no longer be living in standard military housing. He also had several long phone conversations with his family, trying to explain his new assignment without revealing any classified information.
So you're still a Marine, but you're working for the Navy now? His mother asked during one particularly confusing conversation.
It's more like I'm working with the Navy on joint projects, Jake explained. My Marine training is valuable for the kind of work they're doing.
And you can't tell us what kind of work that is? It's classified, Mom. But it's important work, and it's exactly the kind of opportunity.